Welcome to the Why Factor, a chance to work out why we do what we do. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
Thank you for downloading this edition of The Why Factor from the BBC World Service, a programme that seeks to find out why we do the things we do.
I have corresponded with Arthur Shawcross, the cannibal killer in New York. Ivan Milat, who's the backpacker killer here in Sydney. Kathleen Folbig, who killed 4 of her babies.
That's Amanda Howard, true crime author.
Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker in LA. Ian Brady, I spoke to for quite some time. Roy Norris, who threatened to kill me by putting an ice pick in my ear.
She's also known as the serial killer whisperer.
Edward Spreitzer, who's one of the Chicago Rippers, along with 3 other men who had raped and murdered several women in the 1980s. Patrick Kearney, who was a serial killer in California. David Penton, who's a serial killer in Ohio. Robert Yates, who killed 18 women in Washington State. So there's quite a few.
This is the BBC World Service. I'm Becky Milligan. Today on The Why Factor, why are some people fascinated by serial killers?
So it all started back in the late 80s. I actually had plans to be a singer and a dancer. That's where I was headed. I was going towards the stage and sparkles and sequins, and instead I found serial killers and murder.
Back then, Amanda was at school in Sydney, Australia.
Police tonight are warning that a deranged killer is on the loose. He's now killed twice and may strike again.
We had a spate of killings where elderly ladies were being murdered.
The attacks occurred within weeks of each other in Mossman apartment blocks. Both women were in their 80s, both brutally bashed and robbed.
And it ended up being a serial killer case, and it actually hooked me in when we discovered that the killer here was a 50-year-old man and not the young man that they thought it was going to be. We all see suspects on the news and we say, oh, look at his eyes, he looks scary. But really they're not. And that's the scary part about them, is that they are very normal. They look like the man walking down the street.
Hello there. You put on to Murder Mile?
Yeah, we are.
Michael, lovely to meet you. Hello. Hello.
We've signed up for Murder Mile, a tour of infamous murder cases in Soho, an area in central London.
Oh, hello. You here for Murder Mile? You've just booked.
The small group is from the UK, America and India, and what they all share is a fascination for serial killers.
They're mysteries that sometimes can't be solved, so we're left normally with the people who've done this, and we often look at their histories, their backgrounds. We want to understand why they did it, and that's where the real fascination comes. And we try and work out what caused this. Was it environmental? Are people inherently evil? And I think it's that question that we can't get our head around of why, and the act itself, that makes it such a fascination.
I mean, are you quite obsessive? I mean, do you find it entertaining?
I like stories, and the stories aren't always nice and lovely, so I find them fascinating. There's shock value in a lot of these stories, and we do. I think as people, we like to be shocked by something and challenges what we thought we knew.
I mean, there's just certain stories that you just can't. I just think the public doesn't ever get enough of them. It's kind of sick, and yet it's fascinating at the same time. So,
why do you think people find it so fascinating?
I think just because it's so incredibly foreign, and I also think that it's really shocking that people got away with so many dreadful things and these unspeakable crimes, and yet they were able to continue on for whatever reason, and so...
My name's Dr. Adam Lyons. I'm a senior lecturer in criminology at Birmingham City University. I think the thing with serial killers is they are us. They are human beings. And it's trying to understand these individuals who on the surface seem very normal, almost boring in lots of ways, but then again, they're capable of committing such atrocious acts. So I think it's kind of that contrast between what we see and what they're able to do. It is that paradox in a way, I think, of this person could be a friend, but then again, they're able to commit these sort of crimes. I think it's that people are fascinated by and struggle with. There is a concept known as wound culture. In modern society, we're still very much obsessed with torn bodies, with gore, and you can trace that back to Jack the Ripper.
Jack the Ripper was the best-known name for an unidentified killer operating in impoverished areas of London in the late 1880s.
The very first kind of newspapers and photos are people surrounding the body, how we can't help but look, that sort of gruesome stuff. It's kind of created this culture where we have to look because we are fascinated in some way by things that we shouldn't be fascinated by.
Andrei Chikatilo was escorted through the halls of Rostov prison and led to a private cell. There he was executed by a single...
All of the letters sent by the killer have been posted from San Francisco.
Serial killers and their terrible high-profile crimes have spawned a massive global industry. Feature films, documentaries, TV series, books, magazine profiles, hit podcasts.
And today we'll be counting down our picks for the top 10 fictional serial killers.
A woman vanished last night.
On the dark streets of Paris, a killer searches for victims.
This guy is a pathological, psycho killer.
The term serial killer was first coined by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI, in America in the early 70s. Serial killings are defined as a series of 2 or more murders with a significant period of time between them.
A possible breakthrough in the year-long investigation into Sydney's granny killings. Detectives this afternoon charged a 58-year-old man with the murder of an elderly woman at...
What did you do after that, having become so interested?
I decided to go basically to the source. There's no use reading about them in the newspaper when I can actually access them myself and question what I am reading, what I am seeing, what I'm hearing. And basically I wrote to about 10 killers from all over the world, including some in Sydney, some in America, and just said, I'm interested in not just why you're in prison, but I'm interested in your whole life. Are you interested in talking to me? If so, well, let's talk. And the first one to write back to me was Arthur Shawcross, who's a cannibal killer in New York.
The fictional character Hannibal Lecter from the multi-award-winning film The Silence of the Lambs was thought to be based on the real-life serial killer Arthur Shawcross, who died in 2008. What did he say?
He asked me, did I dream about him when I slept, which is a pretty chilling thing to start off with. I responded with, can I just talk to you? Don't be silly. Let's have conversations. And we actually wrote to each other for about 15 years before he passed away. He did send me a recipe once where I was one of the ingredients.
She says these killers cross an imaginary line.
We know where our fantasies end and where reality begins. A serial killer doesn't seem to have that. If they have a fantasy about taking someone and having complete control over them and destroying them, then that's what they do. The rest of us may have those fantasies out there, and the internet has shown us that. But we don't step over that line. I think we want to know that we're okay in comparison. I mean, we all slow down when we see a car crash, and we all sort of secretly think, oh, thank God that wasn't me. And I think with serial killers, we want to know that they're different from us. We want to know that there's something wrong with them that makes us feel better about ourselves. And I think that that's where that fascination comes from.
I have always held the view that this man will continue to kill until he is caught. No woman is safe whilst he's at large.
In the north of England in the 1970s, a serial killer is on the loose. It's one of the biggest manhunts in British criminal history. The whole country is gripped.
I realised he'd actually been to places that I'd been to. I know he went to a cafe called the Tomato Dip, which I'd certainly been to. And so there's that sense of connection. He's only a few years older than me. And that question, how could somebody growing up in a very similar place to me end up doing what he did?
Blake Morrison is a writer and poet who grew up in Yorkshire in the north of England and was inspired to compose a ballad in the local dialect about the serial killer Peter Sutcliffe. known as the Yorkshire Ripper.
Oh, at limestone outcrops like knuckles white through flesh, our men clap down on women, to hold them there for good, and soak up all their softness, and launder 'em with blood. It's then I think on Ripper, and what he did, and why, and how me mates ate women, and how Pete made 'em die. There was a lot of fear. I knew men who'd been stopped by the police. It was quite a long time before Sutcliffe was caught and arrested, and during that period a lot of men were stopped and searched, questioned by the police. And women took to walking down the middle of the street, walking along the white line, because they were afraid of walking along the pavement in case somebody leapt out from a dark alley and nabbed them. So it really was a period of immense fear, obviously a lot worse for women. This is all during a period when nobody knew who he was, and that's part of the fascination. That's why people were so gripped, I think, was there'd be yet another murder, yet another victim, and still the man hadn't been caught. We knew it was a man, and we guessed it was a man, but that's all we knew. And how long is he going to get away with this? How long before somebody is finally arrested? And when he was finally arrested, it was kind of almost by chance. It was on some other grounds that he was stopped. And it was only then that it became clear they'd happened on the right man.
Until he was caught, the myths about the Yorkshire Ripper grew, Blake Morrison says. Jack the Ripper, operating in London a century earlier, was never identified, and the myths persist to this day.
The fact that he was never caught, it created that kind of mystery.
Criminologist Dr. Adam Lynes.
It's kind of been reinforced through TV, books. It's almost made them seem otherworldly, that they were different from us. They look like us, but they are removed from us. And I think that's what's created the mythology around serial murderers.
I think it's impossible not to be fascinated. I know it might sound ghoulish, but it's how somebody could come to do something not just once, as you might kill somebody in the heat of passion, somebody you're close to, but to kill strangers methodically over a long period, almost with a kind of schedule. I think Peter Sutcliffe killed on Fridays and Saturdays. To try and understand the mentality behind that, to understand the factors that produce a man like that, yeah, of course it's impossible not to be gripped by it.
Does it disgust you that you're gripped by it, Ben?
Well, I think you feel guilty. You should be thinking about roses and teddy bears and sweet, nice things. But unfortunately, it's the bad stuff or the difficult stuff that creates stories and creates fascination.
Peter Sutcliffe was convicted of killing 13 women and attempting to murder 7 more. Recently, he's been questioned about other unsolved crimes.
I tell myself that the desire to understand people and what drives people is perfectly natural, and what drives extreme people to do extreme things is even more compelling. You can close it down and call somebody evil and walk away, but if you don't do that, try to understand what motivates them, then of course you're going to be fascinated.
Do you think it may be also a kind of fascination with one's own dark side? Oh my goodness, thank goodness I'm not like that. But at the same time thinking, am I capable of that?
Undoubtedly, you look at yourself, and that's part of what we do when we think about serial killers and follow these stories. We're thinking, would I have done that in that situation? Could I possibly have done that? And if not, why not? What is it that makes one person capable of that and another person incapable?
Which leads us to ask the most frightening question of all. Could any of us be a serial killer?
My name is James Fallon. I'm a professor of psychiatry and human behavior at the University of California, Irvine School of Medicine. Basically, I'm a neuroscientist.
Back in 1989, part of James Fallon's job was to examine brain scans.
One of the groups of people that were coming in were these serial killers and murderers, really bad guys, and they were brought in during the penalty phase of their trials. That is, they had been found guilty, and now, of course, they were willing to submit to a test that would show that the devil made them do it. They're organically crazy. There was something wrong with their brain as opposed to their will. And so they wanted somebody to interpret them. So I was interpreting them. you show them images that usually provoke empathy in people or disgust. And we know normal people have a certain response in these areas. That is, they're activated. You show that to a psychopath, and it's turned off, so it doesn't really get them going, and that's abnormal. So it's not like they don't have that area of brain. It's just not activated by these emotionally provocative and evocative stimuli that we use in the scanner. When I saw it, I said, my God, there's a pattern, and nobody's seen this before, so that's when I really became interested. And then following that, some years after, other groups that did the studies much better than I did, very systematically, found the same thing, this area of the emotional, social brain being turned off when it should be turned on.
At the same time, Professor Fallon was conducting an Alzheimer's study, looking at his entire family's brain scans. He didn't realise that the scans of the serial killers and his own families had become mixed up. The studies were blind, meaning he didn't know whose brains he was examining.
One of the scans in my family was very abnormal, looked just like a psychopath. And I said, this person shouldn't be walking around in public in open society because this is obviously a psychopath, or at least a very impulsive, dangerous person. And, of course, when I peeled it back, that was my name on that. It was me. I started laughing. And so I just kind of blew it off because I know me. I'm okay. So I initially thought the theory must be wrong. But then as time went on, the theory wasn't wrong. And when the genetics came back, I have, high levels of aggression, low levels of emotional empathy, low levels of anxiety, and all those things that are consistent with what you'd find in a psychopath. So I had both the biological markers, but then the question becomes, why aren't I a real psychopath? What's missing?
What's missing? He says that he may have the genetic traits, but what prevented him from becoming a psychopath or serial killer was the fact he was loved as a child.
If you're abused, it's a very dire outcome. These are the people that become psychopathic, if you're abused. But if you're treated well, it has the opposite effect, so it kind of turns off the other negative things. So I said, that's it.
From my own research, no two serial killers are alike. They might seem similar on the surface, but there are a lot of nuances from how they're born. Do they have any kind of undiagnosed mental health issues? Are they undiagnosed psychopaths? All the way to what's their relationship like with their parents, their peers, how do they do at school? There's lots and lots of different factors.
Amanda Howard started off writing to serial killers, but after a few years it went further. You also talk to people on the phone, and I think that's very different. Do you remember the first conversation you had with a serial killer, and what was it actually like?
It's really weird because most of them are nervous, like as if they're talking to someone for the first time. I often have to make sure that, children are silent at my end because I don't want these people to know I have children and things like that. But if you didn't know who you were talking to, you wouldn't believe that you were talking to someone who has murdered like 18 men or something like that, because they just like to talk and ask how your day was and things like that, like a normal conversation.
I mean, have you actually met any in person?
Yes, many.
You visit them in prison?
Yes. One of them I spent a lot of time with was David Burney over in Perth. He was a serial killer along with his common-law wife, Catherine. He was helping me look into an unsolved serial killer case over there in Perth, and so we spent a lot of time going over the case files and everything on that case. For years, we did a lot of research on that.
What did he say, or what was it like being so close to someone who'd committed those crimes?
It's actually quite surprising because these serial killers often seem larger than life, especially when you've spent a lot of time seeing them in the press. And then to stand next to him, and he's 5'2" and I'm 5'4", it's actually quite surprising to find this tiny, insignificant man, and you instantly see how different that power becomes.
But is it healthy to spend so much time with serial killers? Don't they get into your head? Something I put to criminologist Adam Lines.
They're very good at manipulating you, and they're very good at getting what they want out of a relationship or a conversation. It's very self-serving. One has to ask the question, if a serial killer's in prison and they get very little time to interact with people, to them it could be a game, it could be a thrill. what they could be telling you is completely wrong and false. So I had to kind of change the way which I approached my examination of serial killing by looking at secondary sources, looking at court transcripts. So I think whilst there is scope and potential in interviewing such offenders, I myself thought that the risk was too high in lots of ways in terms of the accuracy and the truth of the data.
I mean, are there any of them who you admire?
Oh, goodness, no.
No.
Absolutely
That's
not,
absolutely
no.
beyond the pale.
No, these aren't friends. These are research subjects, and though I spend my life amongst them, they remain criminals and vicious, heinous killers.
Are you going to do this for the rest of your life, do you think? I mean, is there a point at which you will say, look, OK, it's not healthy anymore?
I don't know. I mean, I've had a few times that's happened. I've had a few crises of conscience. I mean, it does make me hypervigilant with my own children, and I hug them a lot harder than probably my teenage son wants. But I don't know. I don't have an end game. I don't know if I will do this forever. I don't know.
Do you ever think, you know, when you're studying it, am I capable of this? Could I ever do it?
A lot of people, when I tell them what I do, there's a bit of, could he be a serial killer? And of course the answer is no. Some of them have very bad upbringings, and it makes you wonder at times, if I had a similar upbringing, would I have gone down the path that I did, or would it have gone very differently? We can never know. Maybe it raises questions in terms of, is nurture more important than nature?
Neuroscientist Professor James Fallon, who discovered his brain functions in the same way as a serial killer's, has asked himself that question. Could he? Would he?
If my world fell apart, what would I do? It's a whole different thing, because then I would be open to these stressors that I've never been open to before. You know, when I came back and finally got analyzed, one of the psychiatrist's summary is, here's a person who has all the urges and drives of a full-blown psychopath, and yet he never acts them out. But if my world falls apart, what am I capable of?
You've been listening to The Why Factor on the BBC World Service with me, Becky Milligan. The producer is Ben Crichton. If you like this, you might want to listen to our programme coming up on dark tourism. And we'd like to hear your ideas for future topics. You can reach us at yfactor@bbc.com.
Thanks for listening to The Why Factor. If you'd like to hear more episodes, there are loads to choose from on our website. Visit bbcworldservice.com/Why Factor. There are also other World Service programmes such as The Inquiry or our podcast, The Compass.